Hello and welcome to the Armenian News Network Groong Week in Review. We are recording this show on November 28, 2021. I'm Hovik Manucharyan, and with Asbed Bedrossian, we will be talking about the following major topics. The Pashinyan Live on Facebook, Trilateral in Sochi, Bilateral in Brussels, Turkish-Armenian Normalization, and Russian-Turkish Co-opetition in Eurasia.
And to talk about these issues, we have with us Hrant Mikaelian, a political scientist and multidisciplinary researcher in social sciences based in Yerevan. He is also a senior researcher at the Caucasus Institute. We also have Yeghia Tashjian, who is a regional analyst and researcher based in Beirut, with expertise in China, Iran, and the Persian Gulf. Tashjian is Associate Fellow at Issam Fares Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs at the American University of Beirut. He hosts a monthly radio program called Turkey Today. Hello and welcome, everyone. Hello, Yeghia. Hello, Hrant. How are you guys?
Hello, everyone.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hello. Earlier this week on Tuesday, prior to his trip to Sochi, Prime Minister Pashinyan gave a lengthy pre-recorded interview. The questions for this interview were pre-selected from the media a day earlier. The media for the rest of the week was mainly dominated by reactions to this interview and the Trilateral meeting in Sochi that was scheduled for a couple of days later after that. Hovik, did you watch this interview? Do you have any impressions from it?
I can't say I watched the entirety of it, although in aggregate, if you look at all the clips that I watched of it, maybe. But one thing that I got out of it that struck me is that essentially Pashinyan seemed to confirm that on November 9, there was a meeting that was being discussed. It seemed to partially vindicate Tatul Hakopian, who leaked this news in late October, and whom the pro-government media were attacking as unreliable. And those attacks were quite severe. You know, the most severe that I've seen of him among what traditionally was friendly social media circles. Among the other reasons given for the delay by the Armenian side, Pashinyan said that the symbolism of November 9 was not good. So they decided to hold the meeting on November 26. And I guess the symbolism of that being the day following Montes' birthday and the day following the handover of Karvachar to Azerbaijan, I guess it's a little bit better than November 9. I don't know. But that's the emotional reaction I got out of it. And the other thing is Tatul Hakopian seems to be sitting on some good leaks, and he has some good contacts throughout this process.
Do you have any idea where he gets those leaks?
No, I don't. But the media he works for is Alik Media, and it's controlled by Arsen Kharatian, who used to be the chief advisor for Pashinyan and is rumored to be still very close with him. So last time I think we discussed this with Artur Martirosyan, where the idea raised was that the leaks may have been done by Pashinyan himself to help generate internal discord and more pretext for moving the meeting.
Yeah, I personally basically read the material in the week that ensued and the coverage of it in the media, but I didn't find anything particularly new or interesting.
The live by Pashinyan was probably meant as an opportunity for him to explain his meeting in Sochi and upcoming processes. So as a summary, the Armenian-Azerbaijani sides had agreed to meet in a trilateral format with Russia on November 26 in Sochi and in a bilateral format in Brussels in mid to late December. I forget when it is. We'll talk about both of those. So going to Sochi, which happened on November 26, Prime Minister Pashinyan and Aliyev as well as Putin met in Sochi. This seems to have been the meeting that three countries were preparing for and had originally planned on November 9. But then suddenly Pashinyan remembered that was the anniversary of the crushing defeat he had a year ago and postponed it. The absolutely idiotic idea to plan the meeting on November 9 and 10, then postponing it, cost the lives of a dozen soldiers on both sides, 23 Armenian POWs being taken by Azerbaijan in the November 15 to 16 mini-war. And we're not even talking about the Shushi incident and 3 Armenians killed in Artsakh, and the additional Azeri checkpoints on Goris Kapan and Kapan Jakat and highways. And by the way, since May 12, 2021, the Azerbaijani side now controls nearly 100 square kilometers inside Armenia proper, and that's according to a Nagorno-Karabakh observer on Twitter. So they had this meeting, and we've had a lot of statements. Hrant, what are your thoughts about the outcome?
I think the outcome we got is smaller than was expected, because obviously Azerbaijan wanted to get more. Their agenda is to get borders recognized and the corridor. And so far, they only agreed to start works on it, although it's also not a good sign, because the process of delimitation is a process of recognizing Azerbaijan's territorial integrity, which implies generally that we It does not mean that we agree, but it means that we cannot condemn anymore Azerbaijan's aggression. So that's first thing. Another thing is that we can see that there is a competition between different formats where Karabakh issue is discussed. We see three parties track, I mean, Armenia, Russia, Azerbaijan. Then there was Minsk group, which still exists but is not active. Then we have emerging European track, although it might also be in line with France. And then emerging 3+3, which is also a problem. So there is competition of formats, but yet not there is no competition of contents there. And also it is depending on our position. I'm afraid we don't have a agenda again, because one fragment I've seen from Pashinyan's interview or this long live was that he again does not have any idea. He asks people what should he discuss, and the question is rhetoric. So generally, there is no idea that we should follow any of our agenda. So that's another problem we face.
As Hrant mentioned, one of the outcomes of that meeting in Sochi was another trilateral statement committing the sides to, I guess, demarcation and delimitation processes. What was your impression? Is there anything substantive in that statement, or as Hrant mentioned, it seems a little bit light in terms of content?
Yes, definitely. Thank you. It was interesting that according to the agreement that both sides actually they tried to or agreed to create a bilateral commission on the delimitation of the border of the both countries. But also it was interesting that demarcation, there was a small sentence which was very, I think, important, saying that Russia is also ready to have a consultative assistance. That is in the end. I'm sure that both sides will not be able to agree on the border. So they will go and also apply for a help. So this means that at the end, it will be the Russians that they will draw the borders. But here it's interesting because there was, I don't remember her name. She was a Russian, whether deputy or spokesperson, where she said that the border delimitation should be based on the Soviet borders, and these maps exist in the Russian Defense Ministry. The problem is that there are many versions of Soviet borders. We have the 1928 Soviet border, which is completely, not the same as what we have de facto now, the borders. We have the 1980 borders, the 60 borders. So it depends on which borders we will try to make, between Armenia and Azerbaijan. It's like a ticking bomb, but eventually it will be the Russians that they will decide. I think this issue will be postponed further because both sides definitely will not be able to agree. And as you said in the beginning, that Azerbaijan was pushing for more, and it was even Azerbaijan's side to have Armenia to recognize Azerbaijan's territorial integrity.
Right.
So this is a long process, I think.
Hrant, I wanted to come back to you. What do you think about the timing of the meeting ahead of the one in Brussels? I think Pashinyan, in his either Facebook Live or maybe as part of the statement in the in Sochi, said that the Sochi meeting was improvised in terms of the date and so forth. Do you think that this is basically Russia carving out a stake, on the issue of demarcation and delimitation, but then deferring resolution of other issues to other formats? What do you think about the timing?
Probably yes. As we could see, there is real competition between the formats. And not only that, Armenia is going to participate in Democracy Summit, which is a rather big summit, but Russians perceive this summit as one being directed against them and China.
Yep.
So Armenia's participation there is viewed like a, let's say, unfriendly move. So they kind of pushed, I think, to have this meeting before Brussels. And also they wanted to have some formal result. And by formal, I mean some text, some agreement, which we got. So they want to show they have still decisive role in the conflict. And the bad part of the story is that as of today, the only way to show the resultativeness of the format is at the expense of Armenian side. That's not only because of Russia, but that's because, again, we don't have any agenda. There is no way the process can be beneficial for Armenians. And to make it this way, we have a lot of things to plan, to change, and to propose. And again, the bad thing is that we are losing time as well. Because, for example, let's go back to Minsk format. The Minsk group format, of course, could be beneficial for Armenia because there are several formal agreements which have not been denounced, and they imply some process of resolution based on the basic principles and so on. But apart from Minsk process, we don't have any good news. So again, I think we should be in search of agenda. And going back to Russia's role, I think, yes, Russia is pushing to have some results and generally at the expense of Armenia.
And just a few things that I also noted. There was nothing in the trilateral statement about the status of Artsakh. There was nothing in that document as well about the prisoners that Azerbaijan still holds.
So, Hovik, does that mean that those issues have been deferred to Brussels, maybe?
Well, talking about Brussels, we did hear Pashinyan say that they are going to discuss the POWs, in Brussels, and it seems, as a layperson, to me, it seems like the use of prisoners as part of bargaining, which is explicitly prohibited in the Geneva Convention, and I don't know why Armenian side is being so quiet about them. But apparently, they're going to meet in Brussels on 15th of December, and it's on the sidelines of the EU Eastern Partnership Summit. Pashinyan mentioned in his Facebook Live that the meeting in Brussels will be focused on humanitarian and POW issues. But one thing that I could not help and sort of notice is that SIPA, or the Eastern Partnership sort of agreement, one of the core principles in there is the non-use of force. So it'll be interesting. I'd like to begin maybe with that question. Does anyone here think that Armenia is showing any signs of using the violation of this principle during this summit? Or is this going to be basically a very bland and non-eventful summit for us? Yet another one, I guess, in the long row.
According to the international law, if the other side is using force and you are forced to sign any agreement, so this agreement is not legit. And I think we can use this in the future to our advantage. But the problem is that under Pashinyan's leadership, I don't think that we are even thinking about this. I remember one of the delegates who went to Hague recently, he posted about this issue, that the November 9 trilateral statement, or some people, they like it to call agreement, it's all forced on Armenia. This is clear violation for the international law. But the problem is that the Armenian side is not pushing this issue forward, or even saying that what has happened is against our will. It seems that we are just going with the flow, and this is very risky and very dangerous in the future.
Right. In fact, Pashinyan said that the result of the Sochi summit, the trilateral statement, is fully in line with Armenia's needs, which means that essentially the exclusion of the issue of POWs is also, it seems to be, he believes that to be true. Hrant, maybe I can ask you, you did mention a competition of agendas. But do you think that the international community will be able to divide things in a way that is complementary, or if it's not, then is this maybe even an opportunity for Armenia to play on one side or another to gain better bargaining position? And why, for example, do you think that the humanitarian issue couldn't be discussed in Sochi, and why was it delayed?
I also expect more to see this issue in Brussels. But at the same time, I would prefer to see this issue brought to the table at every discussion place, because in reality, it's an issue of diplomacy. And I think we should use any occasion, any international meeting, any place to discuss this issue, because it's a really big issue. And that's first thing. Another thing is that, yes, competition of formats is here, and I think it is dangerous for Armenia. There are people in Armenia who are trying to put the issue between Russia and the West. Some support Russia, some support West. But if both West and Russia are seeing that they can divide it somehow, or that they both pretend to more participation of Armenian issues, that's very dangerous for Armenia itself. So how to get out of this situation, I cannot say for sure, but the thing is that it's really dangerous because Armenia is very weak and small, and both Russia and West have a very long range of tools to push Armenia to, let's say, preferable direction. And all of that will be, given that Armenia is in a very weak position, is very dangerous. So on Armenian government's place, I would avoid any competition of formats, and I would try to exclude, let's say, this Russia-West competition on Armenian territory, no matter how it should be.
All right, let's move to our next topic, which is Turkish-Armenian normalization. As we know, in the past couple of months, Armenia has been sending signals to Turkey that it wants to, quote unquote, normalize relations unconditionally. But at every step, Turkey has put more conditions on Armenia to satisfy before Turkey will talk normalization. So this past week, Armenia officially requested Russia's help to mediate in normalization talks. Russia has been stating for some time now that they're ready to facilitate such talks. Hrant, first of all, do you have any idea what Armenia means by quote-unquote normalization of ties with Turkey? What does normalization mean to Turkey? What does it mean to Armenia?
I'm afraid I should repeat myself, but again, we don't have any agenda. So generally, Armenian politics was about, let's say, let's listen to everyone and try to find ourselves within all that prepositions, within all that pushes from outside, and let's find our place there. But as of today, absence of the strategy is already very costly for Armenia. So by saying that we are open to dialogue with Turkey, Pashinyan does not say effectively anything. He only says that we hope that it will go on and that we will have border open. But the problem here is that border can be open under very long list of conditions and the process can be very different. So to have any clarity of what is Armenian-Turkish process as of today, we should take into account very many issues. For example, conditions of Ani city, let's say archaeological site.
Right.
I'm more than sure that no one is even thinking about this. I think Turkey's government does think about it, but Armenian government doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
And the list of issues can contain hundreds of issues. And if we don't put anything on the table or put only, let's say, interests of our importers and nothing else, I think this is not going to work any good.
Hrant, as an example, what do you think about the city of Ani?
First of all, we need full preservation of the site.
Mm-hmm.
We need further excavations. We need full mention of its Armenian heritage, and we need full access there. So we need, let's say, some checkpoint, some special permission for Armenians to visit there, and for everyone from Armenia to visit there. Let's say that would be
a start.
Yeah, good start. And if Turkey on its side would recover some churches, bridges, and so on, I think that could be one of good signs. Now, the problem is that, again, it's time for good diplomacy, and again, we fail with it. And there are good reasons for that, because first of all, Armenian Ministry of Foreign Affairs was always weak and was always abstaining of good work and of planning. But as of now, we have, for 3 months, we did not have any Minister of Foreign Affairs between late May and late August. And since late August, well, for all the 3 months, we have Hrant Mikaelian as Minister of Foreign Affairs, who does not have any idea of what is diplomacy. So that's good reason why we don't have all of that in our agenda, but this is a fact and we should discuss this, I think, as well.
Yeah, we were talking with Vartan Aramyan, a former Minister of Finance, and he was also mentioning that Armenia's economy and the laws are not ready for a full opening. So there hasn't been enough preparation to open the borders unconditionally and so-called normalized relations. But let me turn, Yeghia, you're a diaspora Armenian, so I'm very interested to hear and compare and contrast your impressions to the same question. What does normalization mean to Armenia, to Turkey, and of course, in our case, to the Armenian diaspora as well?
Yes, first of all, what Mr. Hrant said, I totally agree with him, and I think it's a very interesting idea about the status of Ani. I mean, this can be a good starting point, but I'm not sure that the Turkish side is even ready, because as we know that the Turks, they always have this same syndrome in their head. But it is an interesting starting point. Regarding also what the economist that you just mentioned,
Vartan Aramyan.
Yes, that Armenia was not ready. And the problem is that starting from 2009, when there were the Armenian-Turkish protocols and these discussions, the parliament should have passed a lot of protective laws to protect our economy.
Absolutely.
But we didn't take any step. So the problem is that, yes, Pashinyan is also is incompetent and so on, but also the previous administrations, they also shared part of the mistake that we should have foreseen this time will come, because I always say that the day will come that the borders will open. We cannot escape from this reality and from this geopolitical reality that someday this will happen and we should be ready. And now the problem is that it is imposed on us, unlike 2009, where we were a bit flexible, and now we don't have any plan B. And when I was in Yerevan and talking with my colleagues, friends there, some were saying that, look, the Ministry of Economy is saying that if we open the borders or 33% of the GDP will grow. I was like, this is not a mathematical calculation. You cannot foresee something like this. But some people think like this, but my concern is that we will end up like Ajaria. Yerevan will end up like Ajaria in Georgia, which is an autonomous region, which is totally controlled by the Turkish capital. This is my concern. When it comes to your question, I always try to differentiate between normalization and reconciliation. For me, reconciliation is a red line. For me, as a person who is like a third generation of a survivor of a genocide, like if the Armenian genocide will not be recognized, then reconciliation is very difficult because reconciliation happens between societies and not the governments or the state. But normalization is important because I always say that whether we like it or not, having diplomatic back channels with Turkey is important. And if we could maybe, if you would have such back channels, at least maybe we would have tried to postpone or even to decrease or minimize the dangers of the war. Between 1919 and 1920, there were diplomatic back channels between the Republic of Armenia and Turkey. This didn't prevent the war, but at least there were indirect and sometimes direct negotiations. This is important because at least when you have diplomatic presence in a country, declaring war is very difficult. The status that is coming to my mind is the Greek and the Turkish relationship. They are not definitely friends, but the presence of diplomatic relations and also the having economic, to some extent, economic relations and trade relations tries to minimize the possibility of having a war, at least at this stage, in whether in Cyprus or in the Aegean Sea. But doesn't mean that it will prevent a war. Yes, diplomatic back channels are important, but also it's interesting that whether this relationship will be bilateral relationship or trilateral relationship where we will invite the Russians. For me, it's much better if we can maybe try to have within the OSCE context, although it is not the duty of OSCE to activate Armenian Turkish protocols, but it is an option. But again, like as if we are hijacking our sovereignty and our diplomacy to another foreign power or another foreign states, that's also problematic for us.
Hrant, what does Russia bring to the table specifically? Could we find other partners to help mediate the relationship between Armenia and Turkey? And if not, then how can Russia help mediate or normalize ties between Armenia and Turkey, in your opinion?
Let me start with economic issue, which Yeghia has already started discussing. First of all, Minister of Economy said that he is expecting 30% economic growth because of border opening. And of course, as usual, he did not bring any argument for that. And that's, again, a big problem for our public discourse because there are too many irresponsible statements. Let's look at Georgia. Georgia has border open with Turkey, has very highly developed economic relations with Turkey, but Georgia's GDP is right the same as Armenia's GDP, per capita. So how should we expect that Armenia's GDP will grow because of opening border with Turkey if Georgia's border is already open with Turkey? They have access to the sea, direct access to the sea, and still don't have their GDP grow. That's first issue. And then there are several calculations which have been made starting from 2004, and none of those calculations give more than 1 to 1.5% of additional annual GDP growth for several years after border opening. And then we come to already another issue, which is, yes, Turkey is able to dominate over Armenian economy, and not only theoretically, which again can happen when you have two, let's say, subjects which are not equal by their size and strength, but also Erdogan has good experience in invading neighboring economies of Lebanon, of Iraq, of Syria, and other countries, which was directed. And they might, for example, give tax offs for companies which will work in Armenia, which will invest to Armenia. And that will completely distort the situation and bring to many consequences for Armenia. Now, that's economic side. Concerning political side, why Russia is always intervening in, let's say, last year specifically in Armenia-Turkish and Armenia-Azerbaijani relations. Because they see that anyway, these relations will be resolved this or that way. And more or less the track is obvious. It can be read how it will go. And they are trying to be the ones who will be moderator of the process, because the one who will be the moderator of the process will get more, let's say, of their interest protected. So here is the thing. If for Russia, it makes a difference, but I'm not sure it makes difference for Armenia. First of all, because the format is more or less the same, and it again depends on Armenia. So I'm again repeating myself, but I cannot say anything else, because if we don't have any foreign policy and the rest have, we're just following others' lines. So the same thing happens here. So Russia just observes that there's ongoing process and tries to intervene, tries to be within, not outside. That's it.
Definitely. First of all, I think it was very interesting when Hrant gave the example of Aleppo and Beirut. Everyone in Armenia should remember this. When Syria and Lebanon, I think it was in 2010, when they signed the free trade agreement with Turkey, especially the Syrian industry, especially in Aleppo, it collapsed. Even the Turkish lira was circulating in Syria because all the Syrians, they went to the Turkish market, they start buying Turkish products. It was much cheaper and competitive to the Syrian products, so the Syrian industry collapsed. And this is the case in Armenia, what will happen. When we talk about this, people argue with us that, oh, you guys are nationalistic, you are living in the diaspora, you don't know the situation here. I'm like, I'm talking pure economy. I'm not talking about emotions. This is the reality. And coming to the second point, from the Russian perspective, I think the Russians are also concerned, because I remember it was in an interview a few weeks ago, Richard, I think, Kiragosyan, he said that by opening the border with Turkey, then there is a possibility that Armenia's dependency on Russia will decrease. I think the Russians are very aware of it, and that is what they want to interfere in everything. Also, it's interesting that when trying to describe the Russian foreign policy, people, especially the NATO observers or researchers in the West and the NATO-affiliated think tanks, they think that Russia has a strategy. Russia does not have a strategy. The Russians react. That is why they are very flexible. And maybe later we can talk about this issue. That, as Hrant said, that Russia tried to grab the opportunity and wanted to mediate between the both sides. But also here, I want to ask, what about Iran? Maybe Iran can facilitate something like this. It will be interesting that if the Iranians, they just throw this on the table saying that, okay, we can facilitate something about Turkey and Armenia, how Russia will react. I mean, I'm not sure about it, but this will be very interesting.
I think there is a problem on Iran's side too, as well as on Russia's side. Yes, Russia is somehow opportunistic, and Iran is even worse. Iran does not have any strategy here, and probably Iran was the least aware of the war last year. I mean, before it happened, and Iran was one of the sides which lost the most. That's why they're trying to figure out how can they behave now, what should they do. And I don't think they have any good proposition for us in terms of normalization with Turkey and Azerbaijan. Another thing is that we could somehow parallel this process. I mean, in a way, we have similar issues with Turkey and Azerbaijan as Iran has. So we could somehow try to make this agenda parallel, and in this way, increase our critical mass in these negotiations. But who is thinking about that?
Yeah. My personal impression also is that Russia just basically has offered it so that it can be on the table during the talks, and to see what kind of an additional relationship pans out between Armenians and Turkey, so that they can navigate those straits, because I think it is afraid of a loss of influence over Armenia. Okay, let's move to our next topic. Yeghia, we're going to turn to your article, which you published in the Armenian Weekly this past week. You analyzed the Russian-Turkish relations across a wide arc from North Africa to the Middle East to the South Caucasus. These various relationships can be considered conflicts, cooperations, collaborations, competitions, and in fact, you use a new term called co-opetition to describe them. Where does this term come from, and why does it describe the wide range of relationships between Russia and Turkey across the map?
Thank you, Asbed. So actually, there are many terms, for example, lately being used, such as cooperative rivalry, or frenemy. But I like this term, the term co-opetition, because first of all, it is the first time I hear. Second, because I think it clearly describes the Russian and the Turkish relationship. So it's a term coined in 1996. It's a book written by Adam Brandenburger and also Barry Nebelov. It is published in 1996, and it talks about international trade and how companies, they sometimes, for example, they cooperate and compete, and how, for example, collectively they achieve two mutual gains. I think this is interesting because it is the same what is happening between Russia and Turkey. So it's interesting because I was also conducting some interviews with Russian and Turkish scholars, and they all gave me the same examples and the answers. That yes, there are a lot of conflicts. I mean, because recently I'm also writing about the Ukraine case, which is very interesting. So basically, the Russians and the Turks, they have agreed that first, they have agreed that there are disagreements between them. That is when it comes in Libya, in Syria, in Nagorno-Karabakh, and even I think in the future in Ukraine. Right. But however, it's interesting that the disagreement of one case will not affect on the agreement of another case. That is, their disagreement on Syria or let's say on Nagorno-Karabakh is not affecting on their current agreement in Libya or in Syria. Because I remember during the war, there were a lot of reports and news in the Armenian media saying that, okay, the Turks are trying to play an assertive foreign policy and provoking the Russians in South Caucasus. So the Russians will give them an answer in Syria or Libya. But this didn't happen. Maximum it happened that the Russians bombed some places in Libya. This was the very soft answer. Because they all know their red lines. However, what was interesting that in South Caucasus, the Turks were very well aware that this was Russian backyard. So Turkey is now in a transition from a regional to global power. When I say global power, I mean more Eurasian power, because I mean in Eurasia it's a multipolar regional system where you have China, India, Russia, and Turkey is also becoming, so it's becoming a more continental power. So what happened in Nagorno-Karabakh actually turned Turkey into continental power, as Syria turned Russia into continental power in Eurasia in 2015. So that is why Turkey is provoked. So in order to become a continental power, you have to challenge a continental power, and this was the case against the Russians. So it was not like a Russian-Turkish, let's say, agreement, because I also participated in the conference dedicated to the centennial of the Gars and the Moscow Treaty. There were some scholars saying that it is the continuation or the repetition of what happened a century ago between the Bolsheviks and the Kemalists. For me, it was not like this. It was more the Turkish side provoking the Russians, but Russia was on the defensive and it tried to secure its interests. Russia doesn't care if the Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh have more or less hills or Shushi or Hadrut and so on. The more important issue for Russia is that the Russians have a presence in Nagorno-Karabakh, but the Turks do not have. And we should remember that during the first days after the Trilateral statement and after it, the Turks were pushing ahead to have a peacekeeping forces in Nagorno-Karabakh. Something that they tried to have in Idlib. There was a shared or common patrol and so on between the Russians and the Turks. But they also tried to have it in Nagorno-Karabakh, and the Russians refused. So this also makes us to hint that the Russians were trying to push the Turks from Nagorno-Karabakh. Yes, Turkey now is a junior partner, I can say, in South Caucasus, but it's not sharing at least the diplomatic track that is going on in the region with the Russians equally.
So what drives the evolution of these relations from flat-out conflict to more of a competition and sometimes even a collaboration? What are the external forces that these co-opetitions are trying to manage or keep at bay?
I think there is the economy. For example, if we try to compare, now Russia and Turkey, they are interdependent on each other. So this also means that the possibility of war is very low in the future. For example, when the Russian jet was shut down in 2015, right. So Russia started with economic sanctions on Turkey, and Turkey was hit hard. But Turkey couldn't take any provocative or sanctions against Russia. So you have at least annually 6 million Russians, tourists in Turkey, and Turkey now needs the Russian gas and oil and so on. So Turkey is dependent when it comes to the economy. However, Turkey is trying to become also more independent. For example, starting April 2020, now the main oil and gas distributor in Turkey are the Azerbaijanis and not the Russian. So the Russian, the Iranian share decreased and the Azerbaijani share increased. So now Turkey is becoming more dependent a bit on Azerbaijan. That is why Azerbaijan is having more leverage on Turkey. This is very risky in the future because the more Turkey becomes independent when it comes to energy security, it means the more Turkey will become autonomous, and it means that Turkey can have more leverage on Russia by trying to provoking the Russians and trying to cross the red lines with Russia. So what Russia is doing now, it's very interesting that it's realizing that when it comes to energy security, maybe in the future it will lose leverage on Turkey because as we know that recently the Turks, they also discovered gas reserves in the Black Sea.
That's right.
So it means that in the future, the Turks will have more space to maneuver. So what Russia is doing, they are trying to sell equipment and weapons to the Turks, such as the S-400 anti-air missile system. And also the Russians also offer to the Turks to cooperate with them when it comes to 5th generation jets and so on. So Turkey, by trying to buy weapons from the Russians, first Russia is sending signals to the NATO saying that, even your NATO member is not a trustee. So it's trying to create a conflict within NATO alliance. Second, it is making Turkey more dependent on Russia because when you buy such weapons, you need also maintenance. So eventually the Russians will maintain the S-400 equipment and not the Turks because the Turks do not have such technology. So eventually Turkey is also becoming a bit more dependent on the Russians. So Russia is trying its best to control the Turkish industry, whether it becomes military or energy industry. However, the Turks also trying to become independent, and the case is the Bilateral and the drone, where Turkey is now exporting drones to even the CSTO members in Central Asia. So this is the competition. Each side is doing its best to control the other. However, I also argued that Turkey and Russia are not allies and they will never be allies because the geography and the history of these two countries shows that cannot be allies. I mean, the only people that they believe that these two countries can be allies are people like Alexander Dugin in Russia, who thinks that Russia and Turkey can cooperate and turn the table in Eurasia. But there will never happen an alliance between both. Cooperation, yes, definitely. And it's interesting that how Armenia can take advantage from this cooperation. I don't know. I don't have the answer right at this moment.
Yeah. Actually, speaking about the South Caucasus, we've seen this co-opetition, as you say, go from the 44-day war to a lot of post-war elbow shuffling to gain a peacekeeping role in and around Artsakh by Turkey. And finally, to the now so-called 3+3 regional security platform, where Turkey and Russia, at least externally, appear to be in general agreement. How can Armenia or any small country navigate through these stormy co-opetitions between regional rivals?
The Russians agreed on the 3+3 security platform because it will minimize the Western influence in South Caucasus. That is why the Russians agreed. But also the Russians are aware that such an arrangement will give Turkey more leverage in South Caucasus. So Russia does not want to legitimize the Turkish influence in the region. That is why I think this is a long process. It will take a year. So it's not something that it will come up after a few days. Regarding the army, I mean, we are in a very complex geopolitical situation. There are two options, whether go towards the west, that is going from Turkey to west and so on. And the second option is Russia. But however, I think we also have the third option where we can, which is the Iranian option. We can balance between Iran and Russia, and this is not very risky. It was interesting that when I interviewed one of the Iranian political analysts, he was a conservative. He gave me with this proposal, which is very interesting. And this proposal was slightly mentioned in the Iranian newspaper, but unfortunately, not a single Armenian newspaper mentioned about this. The Iranian side also proposed to have a consulate in Syunik. I think this is very, very important because you are also trying to protect the sovereignty of Syunik. Yes, the Russians are there, they have a small base, but the problem is that sometimes you Armenians are very lazy. We are giving all we have to the Russians. This is very mistake because if the Iranians will open a consulate in Syunik, then the Western powers will also be eager to send representatives and open consulates in Syunik. So you are trying to protect the sovereignty of Syunik. any invasion in the future will be out of question. But what was interesting also within the Iranian proposal, that they even proposed to have a military attaché next to the consulate in Srinagar, which was very interesting. They also shared this idea to have an intelligence center, intelligence against or counter-terrorism intelligence center between Armenia and Iran, which is very interesting. And when we say about terrorism, we don't mean just about ISIS and so on, but also about pan-Turkish organizations, which are very, very active on the Azerbaijan-Iranian border, and the Iranians are very aware of it, but the Iranians also need Armenia's help, and Armenia also needs Iran's help. So it's a mutual beneficial relationship. If Armenia is not ready, Iran cannot go further.
Hrant, what is your thoughts on all this in terms of balancing regional powers in the South Caucasus? What specific moves do you think Armenia could take besides working with the Iranians to open consulate in Syunik, which seems to be an interesting idea?
Well, technically, there are some possibilities, of course, on all sides. Beforehand, I would like to make a couple of comments on Turkey and Russia relations. Generally, I agree with what Yeghia said, but the next layer I would like to add is that we should put into equation that Turkey is strengthening power while Russia is declining power. If in 1990, Russia in its current borders had 149 million people, and its GDP per capita was twice bigger than Turkey's, now Turkey has more GDP per capita than Russia, and its population has grown from 56 to 86 million people, while Russian population has decreased. So Russian net power has decreased. Turkish net power has increased. Even more, Turkey is not only Eurasian power, but also an African power, which is also important. And it's increasing its influence in the Gulf. So I think we should perceive Turkey as a very strong player. And when we are talking about Russian-Turkish relation, there is another layer, which is Putin-Erdogan relation, which is not only about Russia and Turkey, or maybe it is, but it's about specific angle of that. Because Erdogan is not very stable in Turkey right now. And if he is gone, then there are powers, let's say another political parties, People's Republican Party, for example, they would have much closer cooperation with the West and much lesser cooperation with Russia. So this is one of the main drivers of Russia's cooperation with Turkey right now. They are afraid that Turkey will have anti-Russian government in some small perspective, or at least might have. And another is that although in every area where both Russia and Turkey are presented, their interests do not coincide or contradict each other, but still they have to deal with each other somehow. Another interesting thing is that Turkey is actively playing already on Russian territory in Tatarstan. And I've been to Tatarstan 4 or 5 months ago to Kazan. There was a big conference and I felt Turkish influence there was very strong, like very, very strong. And Turkish officials were there. Turkish, even architectural styles, they are more and more accepting, and the flags and all of that. And more and more mosques and so. So I think Turkey is just increasing its soft power and hard power, and Russia has to take it into account. And same refers to all other parties. Now, concerning Armenia, since Russia has already some relations track with, since there is Russian-Turkish relations track, and there is some Iranian-Turkish relations track, so we could try to use it once we try to use Turkey-West relations, like during the protocols 2008 to 2010. And partly it worked, partly did not. We still might try to use it, but we should enrich this Armenian-Turkish track with relations with Russia and Iran. So we should work with Russian diplomats, with Russian politicians to try to push them to include Armenian agenda into their agenda with Turkey. Same we should do with Iran. And not only, and again, it's a diplomatic work. It's a very big and hard diplomatic work, given that Armenia has very small amount of resources. But, since we have theoretically a lot of intersections in our interests with many other countries, with Arabic countries, with France, with Russia, with Iran, and so on, we could, let's say, strengthen our position in dialogue with Turkey and Azerbaijan significantly if we do it properly. So I think we have a possibility. Mainly it's diplomatic. And again, the problem is that we don't know what to do. And then we don't know how to do it. Now, we need strategy, and we need to try to make our partners to include ourselves as well in their dialogue with Turkey.
Hrant, one topic that you raised about the personal aspect of Erdogan and Putin is very interesting to me. And I want to ask both of you a final question. Yeghia, what do you think is the level of readiness for succession to Erdogan, and then the readiness in Russia for Putin?
I discussed this actually with some friends that they worked in Istanbul and so on about possible what will happen in Turkey after Erdogan. We Armenians have a lot of wishful thinkings, but we should not put our strategy on wishful thinkings. Turkey has institutions that this institution can generate actually strong leaders. But I don't think that after Erdogan, someone will come and try to fill his vacuum. Now there are rumors that maybe the current Ministry of the Defense, he can be a good candidate. He has good relations, stable relations with NATO, and also some relations with the Russians. This is from, let's say, the pro-Erdogan group. The opposition, the premise with the opposition is that they have many candidates. Davutoglu is a candidate that can also mobilize and attract voters from the middle class conservatives and AKP party people. The second candidate is the head of the JP, the Republicans. And the third candidate is the leader, the woman from the EE party. The problem is that with such three strong candidates, the opposition, if not united on a single candidate, they cannot boost Erdogan. This is very, very difficult. Also, they need the HDP, which in the last elections brought around 10% of the votes. So yes, if all the Turkish opposition is united on a single Turkish candidate with a clear agenda when it comes to the Kurdish issue, I think they can oust Erdogan. But the problem is that I'm not sure if Erdogan is ready to peacefully to hand the government to another candidate. So this means that some turmoil and problems may occur in Turkey when it comes to security and conflict within at least domestic issues, challenges, especially that the lira is devaluating in Turkey. But also, let's not forget that Turkey has a strong industry and it is exportive country. So it will not end like Lebanon. So Turkey now, definitely Erdogan needs foreign direct investments in Turkey, but let's see what will happen. But as I said, as long as the opposition is not united, they cannot boost Erdogan. And it's very interesting what Hrant also said, that I totally agree that when the leader of the JP or anyone from the opposition will come, they will be more pro-West oriented, and they will not support, let's say, Erdogan's Eurasian foreign policy, where it was more towards the east to especially trying to attract Chinese, Qatari, and Russian investments. Mm-hmm. The opposition is more pro-Western, so this also will push Russia maybe to revise its policy towards Turkey in the future. And also another point I like to make here, when we talked about Armenia trying to balance between Russia and Turkey, the international north-south corridor, for me, it is the salvation of Armenia. That is the road passing from India to Iran, Armenia or Azerbaijan, then Georgia or Russia, and then to West. Because this gives us a lot of boost when it comes to geo-economic role of Armenia. Otherwise, we'll become a state that no one cares about. It will be something about the map, having fancy churches and so on. Everyone can visit like a tourist. This is very important for us, because by participating in this north-south corridor, we are putting Armenia on international geoeconomic trade maps. This is very important also in the future in the Belt and Road Initiative, supported by China and also other Eurasian countries. This is why Armenia should work very hard to finish the north-south corridor connecting the Georgian border to the Iranian border. For me, this is the only salvation.
Okay. Hrant, any thoughts on a post-Putin readiness in Russia?
Well, technically, I think both Putin's regime and Erdogan's regime are fundamentally unstable, or let's say they have some issues with prolongation, but it does not mean that they are going to end anytime soon. It might happen tomorrow, or it might happen in 50 years. let's say I'm putting this wide range because it's really a black box, especially Russia. Turkey is more open. And by the way, let me bring in also another figure, which could be united figure of opposition in Turkey. It's Imanoglu. In Russia, it's a bit different. Putin seems much stronger, but last 3 years, the strength of Putin has decreased. And especially after start of the pandemic, Putin got weaker again. And then we see the economic situation, which does not improve, in part by Russian ineffective economic system and in part by sanctions, which cost Russia, by some calculations, of up to 1.5 to 2% of GDP growth per year, which is rather much. And then this context of theoretical changes in these countries, these changes, if Putin or Erdogan went, these changes might be cosmetic, but might be very deep and fundamental. That's also a big if. And then, since the leaders know that there is some issue, they are trying to act more quickly, let's say, more active and more in a more fast manner. And in this context, I also view this the last war, because it was also made, especially on Turkish side, in a way that they found the gap, like when international system was passive, when everyone was busy with their own issues. So they tried to use the time gap. Now, going back to Russia, it's also living through its societal transformation. Putin gets older and older. Then there is an issue of 2024, when there is a question whether Putin will try to stay next term or he will pass the power to someone else.
Right.
So I think there are more questions than answers. I just raised some of them.
All right. We're going to leave it there for today. Yeghia, Hrant, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Asbed. Thank you, Hovik. Thank you, Yeghia.
Bye-bye.
Okay, that was our Week in Review show, and we hope it helped you catch up with some of the issues in and around Armenia from this past week. As always, we invite your feedback and your suggestions. You can find us on most social media and podcast platforms or our website, groong.org. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel on YouTube, like our pages, and follow us on social media. On behalf of everyone in this episode, we wish you a good week. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.